What's up, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about how Blade Runner 2049 is actually a remake of the 1940s Disney film Pinocchio.
That doesn't make sense.
Just hang tight. Cinema Love Letters is going 2049. Hello, fellow film fanatics. Welcome to Cinema Love Letters, where we dive in, dissect, and disembowel our favorite films, all in the name of love. Today we're talking about Blade Runner 2049, featuring Ryan Gosling in the lead role as Blade Runner K, whose name we might assume comes from the author, Philip K. Dick. Seems like if you're looking for great sci-fi, you can bet on anything written by Philip K. Dick. Total Recall, A Scanner Darkly, The Adjustment Bureau, Paycheck, Minority Report.
You don't have to chase me.
And Blade Runner was based off of his novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Ultimately, the theme of the film is real versus false, and what it actually means to be human. And these are the same themes echoed in the 1940 Disney film, Pinocchio. Now, I'm sure many caught the more obvious connections between Blade Runner 2049 and Pinocchio.
A real boy now.
But the similarities and borrowed motifs go far beyond just this one line of dialogue, as the overall structure of both films are almost identical. The opening shot of great films oftentimes carries significant meaning. The first shot of a film should encapsulate an important thematic element, a snapshot of the film as a whole represented in one symbolic image. The opening shot of Blade Runner 2049 is a bright green eye wrenching wide open. The opening eye suggests an awakening, which takes place through discovery and new revelation. And the entire film revolves around Kay's attempts to awaken. We could also note that the color green is used sparingly throughout the film, and is always used to represent truth, nature, and things that are real, just as the mystery of the film revolves around the first natural birth from a fabricated human. Kay also wears this very faded green jacket for the entire film. I actually wasn't even sure it was green until I heard Freya say it in dialogue.
The man with the green jacket.
The faded green fits him perfectly, as Kay is trapped in a life that lacks any sort of natural reality, almost as if the life has been sucked right out of him and his jacket. After the eye, we immediately see the fake world. Endless, highly mechanized structures covering everything that otherwise be considered natural. We then see Kay asleep in his spinner, lying inside of a machine that is mechanized and automated. Not only is Kay not in control of his existence or life, he is also asleep. His awakening still to come, represented by the opening eye seen moments before. In this way, Kay is the same as Pinocchio, a puppet pulled along by strings by masters who reside above him, who has a journey to undertake in order to become a real boy. When Kay lands, he confronts a replicant named Sapper Morton, who he confronts and kills. A sapper, in military terms, referred to a soldier who was responsible for digging tunnels or trenches toward enemy fortifications, with the ultimate goal of collapsing or undermining the wall from beneath, and it would allow for an attacking force to enter the fortress or the city. This name fits the character perfectly, as it is this confrontation and Sapper's subsequent death that starts the process of Kay's enlightenment, a process which ultimately leads to the destruction of the false wall of his false existence. It is also the wall that Kay's boss refers to in their first meeting together after Kay returns from his mission.
The world is built on a wall that separates kind. Tell either side there's no wall, you bought a war.
Fittingly, Kay and Sapper literally smash through a wall during their fight. The conversation between Sapper and Kay before the fight begins also carries notes of the theme of natural versus false. Before they fight, Sapper offers Kay to try his garlic.
Go and try some.
No, thank you. I prefer to keep an empty stomach until the hard part of the day is done.
In other words, killing Sapper. Now, in a way, this is Sapper's means of offering something real to Kay, something human. It's a food that Sapper grows for himself as a treat. And Kay's response could be interpreted as, I'm a puppet controlled by others, and I have other responsibilities to uphold that supersede your human offer to enjoy this food, but thanks. We see a similar interaction later between Love and Lieutenant Joshi, where Love releases a single tear of sadness even as she viciously murders her. We see that Kay, despite his programming commands from above, despite his ownership to those who pull his marionette strings, is still curious. He smells the garlic before he leaves. He also picks up the flower laying before the tree outside Sapper's house and brings it to his nose. These are two attempts to connect with natural things within the first 10 minutes of the film, which also subconsciously shows us the theme of the film, the search for the real. Now, the beginning of most films revolves around establishing the main character's current world. Kay's boss's first words to him are,
You're hurt. I'm not paying for that.
when Kay returns to the Los Angeles Police Department, he's insulted by his fellow officers and forced to undergo a highly mechanical baseline test. Not much of an existence, as it basically shows he's treated like a piece of equipment.
Interlinked.
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold the hand of someone you love? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Now, during the baseline test, Kay has to recite lines from Vladimir Nabokov's Pale Fire, a story that includes reflections of the fictional author's dead daughter Hazel. And in a tongue-in-cheek joke, Joy, basically a ghost-like specter herself, asks if he would like her to read Pale Fire to him, to which he responds,
You hate that book.
This is funny because a ghost hating a book about a dead, ghostly girl, it kinda makes sense.
Throw me a frickin' bone here.
I don't want to read either.
And this is just one of several literary references in 2049. Later, Deckard emerges from the darkness quoting Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island.
Mightn't happen to have a piece of cheese about you now. Would you, boy?
A story about a man marooned on an island of solitude. One that's less on the nose would be Ana Stelline's Life Inside the Glass Room, which might be a reference to Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar.
A life of freedom, so long as it's behind glass.
The Bell Jar, the main character is named Esther Greenwood. In Persian, the name Esther means star, while the name Stelline means little stars in Italian. And the Bell Jar, like Blade Runner 2049, explores themes of identity, autonomy, a search for meaning in the conformist world. These are all themes that directly relate to 2049. And this connection is actually highlighted by the fact that Anastasia
I was locked in a sterile chamber at 8, so if I wanted to see the world, I had to imagine it.
Sylvia Plath's father famously died when she was only 8, which was a major influence on her life and her work. And those might seem like unnecessary side points, but those are the elements that make this a movie worth loving.
He reads. That's good.
Now, when Kay goes home, we see he's not only hated by his neighbors, but that he lives a lonely life in a bleak-looking apartment. Most of us enjoy a hot shower after a long day. Kay's shower is the minimal amount of water required to get the job done, shot out as quickly as possible, just that, and nothing more. We're then introduced to Kay's girlfriend, a female artificial intelligence program created by Neander Wallace called Joy. Now it's here that the Pinocchio connections begin to really take shape, for Joy is the Jiminy Cricket of the Blade Runner 2049 story. The primary hint that this is purposeful and intentional is in her theme music. The exact same piece of music used to introduce Jiminy Cricket in the 1940 film Pinocchio.
I see you're also a customer.
Now, Pinocchio is much more than just a children's cartoon. It's a deep psychological work about becoming a real boy by developing understanding through the destruction of our naivete. And strangely enough, Pinocchio's naivete is actually represented by Jiminy Cricket, just as Kay's false existence is represented by Joy. And although he was given the job by a magical blue fairy, we come to understand as the film progresses that Jiminy Cricket isn't actually all that good of a conscience.
Fine conscience. I turned out to be. Late the first day.
Ultimately, he's too naive and too inexperienced. And his initial advice to Pinocchio is fumbling, naive, and just bad.
Temptations. They're the wrong things that seem right at the time. But even though the right things may seem wrong sometimes, sometimes the wrong things may be right at the wrong time, or vice versa. Understand?
And Joy's advice to Kay honestly doesn't do him any good. It keeps him more confused and lost than he might have been on his own.
I always told you, you're special. You're too important for Kay.
Her relationship with him is nothing more than performance. She is quick to change depending on whatever she believes will please him, which ultimately lacks the challenges and inequities of a real relationship with a real person, which is what makes real relationships, makes him real. She asks Kay about his day in a manner we later see is pre-programmed into all of the Joy models.
It was a day. Huh? What a day.
It was a day.
This is Kay's current existence, and he is fully committed to it.
Let's just say it's our anniversary.
Is it?
No, but let's just say that it is.
More fabrication and falseness, as is his established world. Now, when they go out on the roof for Joy's first time, we get the impression that their moment is broken by Lieutenant Joshi calling to interrupt, but the moment's actually broken when Joy tells him,
I'm so happy when I'm with you.
to which Kay responds,
You don't have to say that.
And this is more of a technical command. Even Kay can recognize that Joy doesn't mean what she said. She's programmed to be happy with him. This shows that even though Kay is lost inside of his false world, he still clamors for a sense of reality in this unrealistic relationship. Even here, he is searching for what's real. Now, their embrace is ruined when Joshi calls. Kay doesn't even unfreeze her. He just turns it off and leaves. His girlfriend is basically like your smart TV that you turn on and off, you know, when you have to go to work. All of this, of course, is designed to make us feel for Kay, which is a challenging thing to do because, you know, he's a merciless killing machine designed to kill other killing machines, but it does seem like he has a heart, you know, like there's a soul in there somewhere, and he can at least recognize that there is something more real than the sad life that he's living. And that's the purpose of the establishment of the current world. We need to see where they are so that we can see where we're going.
It won't be much longer. Just putting on the finishing touches.
Next, Kay meets with Lieutenant Joshi. Lieutenant Joshi and Deckard may dually represent the character Geppetto from Pinocchio. Initially, Geppetto is simultaneously Pinocchio's father, creator, and string puller, just as Joshi is for Kay.
Are you telling me no?
I wasn't aware that was an option, madam.
Attaboy.
Both Joshi and Deckard ultimately want the same thing early on in the film, which is to keep the truth from being revealed.
So what you saw didn't happen.
I didn't want our child found.
Joshi wants the child destroyed quietly.
I'll trace.
Deckard has gone into hiding to keep the child from ever being found, to maintain the same type of order. Now, this idea is supported by the fact that Lieutenant Joshi and Rick Deckard look somewhat similar, with the same colored hair and similar hairstyles, which are actually the same hairstyle as Geppetto and Pinocchio. And I'll touch more on this later. At the beginning of Pinocchio, Geppetto tells Pinocchio that tomorrow he'll be going off to school. When Pinocchio asks why, Geppetto simply responds, Now, in this way, Geppetto and Joshi are actually very similar. Geppetto is going to send Pinocchio to school because it's the orderly thing ordained by society, by these unspoken rules. Similarly, Joshi wishes to protect the wall that the world is built upon and to keep it intact.
It is my job to keep order.
But both Geppetto and Joshi's reasons, or lack thereof, simply will not suffice. Sticking to protocol and going with the established order are not the ways in which naive children become wise and enlightened adults. And the last thing Joshi does before Kay leaves...
You've been getting on fine without one.
What's that, madam?
A soul.
Emphasizing the primary theme of the search for the real and authentic against the false and fabricated. As Kay flies away from this meeting, we again hear the words of Sapper Morton.
Because you've never seen a miracle.
The wall Lieutenant Joshi was talking about has, in fact, already been prepped for destruction. She just doesn't know it yet. Kay's investigation leads him to the Wallace Corporation. We see a nice little piece of characterization here as Kay interacts with a chatty, bald-headed record keeper, who talks about a blackout that destroyed all the digital records in the world, and he states that his mother still cries over the lost baby pictures.
Well, it's a shame. You must have been adorable.
A sign that he strives for humanity, that he sees being human and born and being loved as positive. We could also see this as Kay's first segue into telling mistruths. His empathetic statement could be a white lie, as the record keeper isn't the most attractive character in the world, and lying is going to become an important part of Kay's character arc, just like it is for Pinocchio. Now in Pinocchio, the Blue Angel tells our puppet hero that in order to become a real boy, he must
prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you will be a real boy.
So, if this is a remake of Pinocchio, it would stand to reason that in order for Kay to become a real boy, he must also live up to these same platitudes. And just like in Pinocchio, our main character must learn the hard way that lying and cheating won't get you ahead for very long. It's a common film narrative. The main character learns a trick or manipulates the world for his or her own benefit, and this works for the first half to, 3/4 of the movie, until ultimately these wrong actions catch up to the character, and this general character arc can be applied to most films if you really think about it. And Blade Runner 2049 is no different. Kay will learn to lie and manipulate and act for his own accord. For a while this does work for him, but ultimately it just leads to his greatest downfall and the subsequent rise in the climax. Kay's first overt lie comes when he meets Love, the primary servant of Neander Wallace. She asks,
Was there anything unusual about how you found her?
When he says,
You know how people are about old serial numbers.
It's quite clear she doesn't buy his response, which we, the audience, recognize as a lie. The role of the Blue Fairy actually ends up being taken up by Love. While she's not directly responsible, Love works for the Wallace Corporation, so she indirectly represents the entity that gave Kay life, just like the Blue Fairy. Love also saves Kay from the gang on the trash planet, just like the Blue Fairy saves Pinocchio from the bad man's cage, midway through Pinocchio when Jiminy Cricket proves useless in helping him get free. In some ways, by destroying Joy and then being defeated by Kay, Love is actually giving him a chance at life, allowing him to fulfill his purpose of bringing Deckard to Ana Stelline. One could view Love as the antithesis of the character Rachel from the first Blade Runner. They look very much the same down to the haircut, although Love wears white where Rachel wore black, which fits the two opposing characters perfectly. From our understanding of the events after the first Blade Runner, Rachel is a replicant truly capable of love, not only willing, but eager to break away from her creator, Tyrell, in order to forge a life with Deckard, a man with whom she has met and fallen in love with. Love, on the other hand, shows signs of the same desire for connection, love, and humanity, but is ultimately a programmed slave, unable or unwilling to break her commitment to her human master, the psychopathic Neander Wallace. She is called Love, which, according to the original screenplay, is not even her real name, but a nickname Neander calls her, which she adopted for herself.
He named you. Must be special.
I'm here for Mr. Wallace.
Ironically, Love is a replicant who understands the desire for being loved, but is ultimately unwilling or unable to break free from her programming in order to find it or feel it for herself. In their first interaction together, Love actually makes a pass at Kay.
It is invigorating being asked personal questions. Makes one feel desire. Do you enjoy your work, officer?
Please thank Mr. Wallace for your time.
Now, this rejection is only the first of 3 examples of Kay turning down sexual advances from real, breathing, flesh and blood people. Marinette the prostitute and Lieutenant Joshi both make passes at him and are both also outright rejected.
What happens if I finish that?
Shouldn't I get back to work, madam?
We could see this as Kay being loyal to Joy, but when we consider this more deeply, thematically, these are just more examples of Kay choosing the false and the fabricated over the real and the organic. Secondly, Kay rejecting Love plays into the characterization of Love as a replicant who is forced to suppress her more human emotions in order to maintain her job. Being scorned by Kay eliminates her possibility of following in the symbolic footsteps of Rachel before her, who fell in love with Deckard and ran away with him and eventually birthed something truly real. Love will never have this chance, not only because Kay scorns her advances, but also because she is truly a slave to Neander Wallace.
Welcome back, sir.
When we see Love meet with Neander Wallace for the first time, we're seeing the absolute depths of the lack of humanity, what keeping the wall the world lives on intact would eventually bring us to.
Well, let us see her then.
Wallace, despite being human, in some ways he acts more machine-like than anyone else in the film. His lack of true vision is also symbolic, as his view of the world is no longer human, but is aided by advanced technology. And Neander's very name links to Homo neanderthalensis, the species of humans who became extinct after Homo sapiens proved to be the more dominant and efficient species. Similar to the story of humans and replicants, he does not view replicants as worthy of life, as we see when he viciously murders a newly born replicant simply to prove a point to Love. We see that despite her seemingly human desires shown in the previous scene interacting and hitting on Kay, Love is a soldier who's going to fall in line for her master and do as he commands, whether she believes in it or not.
The best angel of all.
One thing the movie definitely has going for it is that the writer of the original Blade Runner, Hampton Fancher, returned 40 years later to write the sequel. I think one of the great things about having the original writer come back is that they're going to be more inclined to protect their work. We're less likely to get something like Ghostbusters 2016 or a Bad Boys for Life.
One last time. One last time.
These 2 late sequels to great films that were more about easy cash-ins and member berries.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, in honesty, there are very few 2 late sequels that have been able to add something meaningful onto the original story. Movies like Top Gun Maverick, Toy Story 3, the Netflix series Cobra Kai are decent examples of late sequels with an effective and meaningful add-on, while there are movies like Independence Day Resurgence, Zoolander 2, and The Matrix Resurrections being examples of pathetic cash grabs acted out by the studios.
Things have changed, the market's tough. I'm sure you can understand why our beloved parent company, Warner Brothers, has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy.
What?
Blade Runner 2049 was released for mass audiences on October 6, 2017. It currently holds an 88% Rotten Tomatoes score and 81% on Metacritic. However, Blade Runner only managed to gross $267.5 million worldwide, against a combined production and advertising budget of approximately $345 million. For comparison, the Independence Day sequel Resurgence made $389.7 million worldwide off a $165 million budget. It was great for fans of science fiction that we even got a film like this, but very bad for the penny pictures as Sony Pictures.
When I started this day, I had one goal, and that was to get a deal. But then I learned what commission is, and now my goal is money, 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 bitch.
But this is the dichotomy between creating great art and making money. Ironically, these themes of soulless corporatization against feeling, meaning, and authenticity are actually primary themes of Blade Runner 2049. Perhaps in that sense, it would be aesthetically unfitting for Blade Runner 2049 to be a massive monetary and critical success. Although in another world, you know, that would have been nice.
Yeah, well, that's not really where we live.
No.
Pinocchio goes on a journey of self-discovery through a series of misadventures in which various people use Pinocchio for their own purposes. Honest John and Gideon first sell Pinocchio off to Stromboli's puppet show, where Pinocchio soon learns that some people are selfish, greedy, and malevolent. After escaping Stromboli, they then send him to Pleasure Island, where boys who succumb to the hedonistic pleasures of the island, such as the looting, drinking, smoking, and gambling, become donkeys to be sold to the salt mines for slave labor.
Right.
These misadventures are actually necessary for Pinocchio because there are valuable lessons that he needs to learn in order to become a real boy. In Blade Runner 2049, Kay's strings are pulled as he is drawn toward the truth of the replicant-born child, manipulated by a variety of hands, all with purposes that are not in alignment with his own. It's no coincidence then that the woman who Freysa sends to accost Kay at the outdoor eatery goes by the name Marinette, a somewhat obvious play on the word marionette, and the next character to pull on Kay's strings to get him onto his path. When accosting Kay at the table, Marinette asks him,
Now who keeps a dead tree?
A symbolic question that could be interpreted as, who values real life? The conversation between Kay and Marinette ends when Joy's chime plays.
You don't like real girls.
Kay seems embarrassed. It's a challenge for him to keep searching for what's real as opposed to what's fabricated, and it is this attachment to the fabricated world which Kay must learn to overcome. Back at Sapper's, Kay discovers the baby sock and the photograph of the woman holding the child in front of the tree. It's worth noting that the piano key he presses at Sapper's, which ultimately leads him to find Deckard, is the same key he presses at the hotel in Las Vegas that brings Deckard out of hiding. Here, Kay also discovers the crux of the plot. Believing it possible that he might be the real boy, Kay does a very human thing. He lies to Lieutenant Joshi.
What's that date? Is that a birthday? Is that a death day?
I don't know yet.
The color of this pen is...
After this, we again see that Kay's conscience, Joy, is actually kind of a naive fool, as she reinforces to Kay that she always knew he was more than just another replicant.
I always knew you were special. A child of woman born.
Now, it's a strange thing to not be able to trust your conscience, but this is highlighted in Pinocchio as well, as Jiminy Cricket proves to be a rather helpless assistant to Pinocchio. As Kay is searching through the database records using a cleverly modified 35mm Moviola, the historical industry standard for film and soundtrack editing, he discovers two DNA strands that are exactly identical, one male and one female. This room is also shaded in hues of green, symbolic of the truth being brought to light. The female is shown to be deceased, diagnosed with Galatian syndrome, a fictional syndrome in the Blade Runner universe in which replicants begin to develop human-like emotions and desires, which is essentially the theme of the entire film. The name Galatian syndrome actually has biblical connotations, as the story of the Galatians tells of Paul the Apostle urging the people to break free from the shackles of their past, similar to the way the replicants are looking to break free from the shackles of their enslavement. From here, Kay goes on his own journey of discovery, all while being controlled like a puppet on strings from various unseen hands. On the trash planet, Love saves Kay with missile strikes that kill the gang members who have him surrounded and outgunned.
Fire again.
Mr. Cotton, the man who runs the orphanage, is the 2049 version of the coachman character from Pinocchio, the man who turns children into donkeys and sells them to the salt mines, even down to the wardrobe, with both characters being clad in wraparound scarves. Mr. Cotton, reflectively, has an entire legion of child slaves who both fear him and are forced to do his bidding.
'Cause I got all kinds.
While he uses fear and threats to keep them in line,
I'll put you outside where the sky is raining.
just as the coachman does to the child donkeys.
You boys have had your fun.
Now, the discovery of the wooden horse leads Kay to Ana Stelline, the memory maker who is the true child born from replicant Rachel. It is at Ana Stelline's facility that we see a bright green, natural environment for the first and the only time in the entire film. The hard cut to her working environment is a harsh one, which makes the sudden explosion of natural greens and blues and the sounds of chirping birds all the more startling, a sign that, despite being a CGI facade, there might be something truly real here. At almost exactly the halfway point of the film, Ana Stelline reveals to Kay that the memory of the horse is a true memory that really happened. Kay finally loses himself to his human side.
I know it's real.
With this, Kay leans even further into lying and fabricating truths, his programming no longer effective or important to him, as he believes himself to be unlike the other slaves. He outright lies to Lieutenant Joshi, saying he found and destroyed the child.
You just stopped a bomb from going off.
Kay's devolvement into the false is punctuated by an awkward sexual encounter with Joy and Marinette. But this is just another form of manipulation being carried out upon Kay, as Marinette uses the opportunity to place a tracker on him at the behest of Freza, and Joy actually enables Marinette to take advantage of Kay for the purposes of the Resistance. In this way do both Joy and Jiminy Cricket act as naive internal voices. Their words carry good intentions for their respective main characters, but they have a lot to learn about the world and how it actually works before they can provide any meaningful advice.
Go ahead, make a fool of yourself. Then maybe you'll listen to your conscience.
The next morning before she leaves, Marinette makes a harsh judgment against Joy.
I've been inside you, not so much there as you think.
The statement rings with an air of truth. Joy really is just an artificial intelligence device. She is the definition of the unreal from which Kay innately seeks to separate. A truth which Kay must come to grips with before the film is over.
Coffee?
Kay's discoveries lead him to the abandoned city of Las Vegas, an obvious metaphorical stand-in for Pleasure Island. For what other city in the United States could so accurately represent the land of hedonistic pleasure-seeking than the infamous City of Sin? Our first ground-level shot of Las Vegas portrays a fallen statue with one eye, the same one eye seen in the beginning of the film, and a symbolic clue that Kay is getting closer to his own awakening. The beehive serves as a visual metaphor for the real versus false narrative of the film. It's yet another symbolic sign that Kay is getting closer. The bees are, along with Deckard's dog, the only animals seen in the entire film. Back in the city of Los Angeles, Love is on a mission to find the child for her master. Before Love kills Joshi, she sheds a single tear. At first, this was really confusing for me because Love seems to have zero love for Joshi, and subsequently murders her before using her dead body to access the computer system. There is nothing here to indicate why Love would cry over the death of Lieutenant Joshi. What we're witnessing is Love's suppressed, human-like emotions finally being allowed to come to the surface. Wallace would certainly see her emotion as a flaw in her programming, and while Love cannot take her anger out on Wallace, she has a prime opportunity to take it out on Joshi instead, fueled by the idea that Joshi would kill the first replicant-born child, because it shows the same carelessness toward replicant life as Wallace with his senseless murdering. Love tells Joshi,
I'm gonna tell Mr. Wallace you tried to shoot me first. So I had to kill you.
Because she's more human than human, superior to Lieutenant Joshi in every way.
And do what you gotta do.
However, it is Love's very human ego and her blind dedication to the system that will ultimately be her downfall. Our idea that Lieutenant Joshi and Rick Deckard dually represent the character Geppetto is strengthened by the fact that as soon as Joshi dies, Deckard appears in the film. This, essentially keeps the characterization of Geppetto, the caring but somewhat helpless father figure, continual throughout the film, being passed from Joshi to Deckard. When Kay finally brings Deckard out of the shadows, Rick says to him,
"Don't lie. It's rude."
Echoing the instructions given to Pinocchio by the Blue Fairy.
Perhaps you haven't been telling the truth, Pinocchio.
Perhaps. Oh, but I have. Every single word.
Write it! Write it or I'll break it off!
And Kay's been doing a lot of lying for the past hour or so. During their fight, Kay hides out in the digital theater. It's there that we see the false representations of Elvis and Marilyn Monroe performing on stage while Kay hides from Deckard. This also symbolically represents Kay's conflict between the truth and his false reality. It's a beautiful and symbolic metaphor for Kay's entire plight. He's hiding within this false reality, just as Kay's been hiding within the false reality represented by Joy, another CGI performer, while also allowing the deceptions by the Resistance, Love, and Deander Wallace to manipulate his movements. But Kay's false reality is crumbling. It's starting to flicker, starting to skip, it's starting to silence itself. It's basically falling apart. Symbolically, it's Rick Deckard who pursues him through this room, who's representing the pathway to enlightenment and to the eventual truth.
We could keep it this or we could get a drink.
I'll take the drink.
Love and the Tyrell team then arrive in Vegas to take Deckard back to Wallace. During the skirmish, Joy tries to protect Kay from being killed by Love.
Stop!
And this is a scene reminiscent of Jiminy Cricket leaping out to try and protect Pinocchio from much larger attackers.
I'll knock your block off!
But Pinocchio, like Kay, is not yet ready to let go, and so he loses Jiminy Cricket for this part of the film.
I'm through! This is the end!
Kay then gets picked up by the Resistance, and is here where Freysa finally reveals to him that Ana Stelline is the daughter of Deckard and Rachel, not Kay. One of the greatest elements of the film is the cinematography. The director of photography for the film was legendary shooter Roger Deakins. The lighting throughout the film directly serves each scene to add to the mood and emotion of whatever's happening. For an example, Wallace's hideout is filled with these glimmering reflections of water across the walls. It's a suggestion that it's a womb, symbolic of Wallace's obsession to create replicants capable of breeding new life. The yellow of Neander's lair is also representative of the fact that Neander's womb is dry, barren, without child, the same colors as Deckard's abandoned Las Vegas. We see this reflective water element again in the hideout of the Resistance, only here the water is clearer, untinged by toxicity, symbolic of both life and the unadulterated truth being brought to the surface. Freysa, of course, has only one eye, the final singular all-seeing eye of the film, which represents Kay's awakening to the truth and his down-and-out moment that often occurs at the end of Act 2 or the beginning of Act 3. It's the point when the character's forced and false attempts at manipulating reality come crashing down on him, leading him to the truth that he is not as special as he thought he once was.
You imagined it was you. Oh, you did.
Kay is then tasked by Freysa to find Deckard and kill him before he leads Wallace to their secret location. Wallace suggests to Deckard that perhaps his entire meeting with Rachel was premeditated by Tyrell himself.
Did it never occur to you that's why you were summoned in the first place? Designed to do nothing short of fall for her right then and there.
This is a psychopathic manipulation technique, essentially a form of gaslighting. However, Deckard sees through Wallace's words, and his response,
"I know what's real,"
directly mimics the response Kay gave to Ana Stelline earlier in the film.
"I know it's real."
Wallace tries to ply Deckard with love by presenting him with a carbon copy of Rachel. Deckard brushes her off by telling Wallace that he got her eye color wrong.
Her eyes were green.
Green again here comes into play to represent what is real as opposed to what is false and fabricated, just like the green flower at the beginning of the film and the green room in which we are introduced to Ana Stelline. Deckard's rejection of the false is mirrored in the very next scene. A depressed and lost Kay comes across a CGI representation of Joy. As Kay stands there, he realizes that his entire relationship with Joy was false, part of her programming, just as his entire existence is false, all part of the programming that was placed within him. Perhaps he also realizes that he was manipulated for this entire film by Love, Joshi, and Freysa. The gun in his hand suggests he might be contemplating suicide, but instead, Kay decides to do something human. He decides to save Deckard and introduce him to his daughter, which is of Kay's own prerogative. With this decision, Kay actually fulfills the platitudes presented by the Blue Fairy to become a real boy, to be brave, truthful, and unselfish. In the climactic ending, Kay shoots down the ship carrying Love and Deckard, which crashes in front of a giant seawall, a physical representation of the symbolic wall that Lieutenant Joshi spoke about earlier in the film, and the one Sapper aimed to undermine. The final battle between Kay and Love is a direct homage to Pinocchio saving his father, Geppetto, from the belly of a massive whale who has swallowed him whole. Wallace, in his overarching power and need for dominance, is the metaphorical whale, which overtakes the father, who is rendered powerless by such a creature, and requires the strength and newly gained wisdom of the son to save him from the depths of the creature's bowels. Kay, of course, defeats Love in a violent battle, but not before sustaining serious wounds that will eventually lead to his death. But in his death, Kay finds a sense of peace and victory as he lies in the snow outside Ana Stelline's workshop, and Deckard enters the building to lay eyes upon the daughter of his true love, Rachel, for the very first time. It's a somewhat sad ending for our main character, Kay, one that harkens back to the death of Roy Batty in the original Blade Runner. And it appears, despite so many symbolic connections to 1940s Pinocchio, there is no glorious moment for Kay at the end of 2049. No granting of real boyhood by a beautiful blue fairy, only a slow and bloody death on the stairs of the true child. In this way, we could almost view 2049 as the dark twin of the Pinocchio story, one where the good guy doesn't get what he wants in the end, but instead discovers that he was, in fact, nothing but a useless pawn in the game of other, greater, more important characters all along. But maybe not. Perhaps Kay is in fact the child of Rachel and Deckard, not the singular born soul, but a twin, birthed alongside Ana Stelline, with a destiny written all those years before.
I've stumbled onto a major company conspiracy, Mac. How about that for stress?
The film is filled with subtle clues that Kay and Ana Stelline are actually twins. The first and most obvious clue is when Kay is using the old moviola to search through birth records. He literally discovers that the DNA from the sock matches two individuals, a boy and a girl. An impossibility, as two people cannot have identical DNA.
They're identical.
This is true, except in the case of monozygotic twins, or twins who are formed from the splitting of a single fertilized egg. While monozygotic twins are usually the same sex, on rare occasions the twins may have male and female sexes, usually due to genetic defects or chromosomal abnormalities.
Says the girl died there. Genetic disorder. Galatian syndrome.
This is perhaps a tongue-in-cheek nod to the fact that she was in fact human and had human emotions. As Kay sits at the moviola, right before he's about to discover that there are two matching DNA strands, he calls Joy into the room, and Joy doesn't appear beside him, but on top of him, causing his masculine face to morph into her feminine one, a visual representation of male and female in one being. We actually see a similar shot of Ana Stelline looking into the device with the reflection of Kay juxtaposed right on top of her. Now, in the record-keeping system, the female DNA profile is placed on the left, while the male DNA profile is placed on the right. Kay's right hand is given primary focus in several important scenes. In the first scene where he's asleep in the spinner, after Kay meets Ana Stelline, he walks out into the snow and holds out his right hand, letting the snow drift down upon it. And then at the end of the film, when Kay delivers Deckard to Ana Stelline, we again see him staring at his right hand, which he uses to cover his bleeding wound as he lays there dying. The next and first cut to Ana Stelline inside her workshop is her left hand, in the same position as Kay's hand earlier, playing in the drifting snow. Left and right, the two sides of the monozygotic twin structure.
A boy and a girl. It's impossible.
The date on the horse is also a clue that these two may actually be twins. 6/10/21 translates to June 10th, 2021 if read as an American, and June 10th falls under the zodiac sign of the Gemini, also known as the twins.
Take a look at this. Jesus Christ. That right there is the male. Now let's talk about the male.
We can also consider the naming of the characters to be a clue if we connect their names back to the Bible. Rachel is a character from the Hebrew Bible. She has issues conceiving a child, but eventually gives birth to two boys. The first is named Joseph.
Joe.
What do you want, Joe?
The second son is named Benjamin, who has a daughter named Esther. If we recall, Ana Stelline draws connections to Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, in which the main character's name is Esther Greenwood. The name Esther is also often associated with the word star, and the name Stelline in Italian means little stars. The historical biblical imagery of the grave of Rachel also eerily reflects the imagery of Rachel's grave at Sapper Morton's farm from the film 2049. These connections might be loose, but they're also very difficult to deny. And Denis Villeneuve has also utilized the concept of twins or doppelgangers in a previous film, Enemy. And Philip K. Dick was known to have an obsession with his dead twin sister, Jane.
There's a bit of every artist in their work.
Denis has gone on to say his favorite director is Stanley Kubrick, and Stanley was famous for making films and never explaining their true meaning. Even to this day, people debate the meaning of the very strange ending to 2001: A Space Odyssey. In this same vein, I would be very surprised if Villeneuve ever came out to say whether this theory is true or not. This sense of ongoing mystery only adds to the mystique and excellence of 2049, and honestly, it only makes me love this film that much more.
Is it real?
I don't know. Ask him.
So maybe Blade Runner 2049 isn't exactly a remake of Pinocchio. There are a lot of divergences, and at the end of the day, Blade Runner 2049 is a very unique story. I still think it's really cool that a director and a writer, who were making a blockbuster film in 2017, decided to borrow story elements and pay homage to a Disney cartoon from 1940. It just shows that certain storytelling structures are timeless and classic, and the reason they're like that is because they speak to a deep part of the human soul. It's what makes storytelling in movies so awesome. The way they can go beyond lights and cameras and special effects and make real magic happen inside of us. The way our ancestors did around the first campfires, telling different versions of these same stories that we know and love today.
No one in the place except you and me.
Blade Runner 2049 might have been a commercial flop, but to true cinema lovers, it was a rare, artistic cinematic gift given to us by the head honchos at Sony Pictures, who usually only dole out carbon copy popcorn fart films that have no substance, meaning, or soul. In the years ahead, 2049 will surely become a cult favorite. It is for this reason that Blade Runner 2049 is truly a film worthy of a cinema love letter. Leave a like, hit the follow button, and if you have a suggestion for a great film to be analyzed by Cinema Love Letters, leave the idea in the comment section below. Thank you for watching Cinema Love Letters. We're going to see you for the next one.